What if the most famous body of the 1950s signed a contract so small it wouldn't even buy the poster that sold him, and then, one film later, rewrote his price overnight? Which title paid like a gamble, which one paid like a throne, and which surprise in the middle quietly locked his rate for years? Tonight, we follow the money. What Steve Reeves actually took home then, and what that feels like today. In plain language, no fluff, no stage play, just the numbers that crowned a matinee idol. Think you know which film wrote his biggest check? Hold that guess and don't peek. Because if the roar of fame came after the signature, then number 15 is where the legend starts on a starter wage, and the climb begins. Number 15, Hercules, 1958. He wasn't a studio-made star yet, just a fearless newcomer taking a chance on a lean Italian adventure that nobody in Hollywood expected to matter. The contract matched that reality. A simple flat check. No percentage, no American bonus, no back end. When the dust settled, the number on that check was $10,000 in 1958. Respectable for a first-time headliner overseas, but hardly the stuff of legend. In today's terms, that's roughly $111,000. Good money, not life-changing. An American distributor grabbed the film, blasted it across drive-ins and matinees, and turned a modest import into a roaring hit. But the paycheck didn't magically grow just because the crowds did. Hercules minted the brand called Steve Reeves, yet the payday stayed anchored to the moment he signed, not the fortune that followed. The lesson is simple. The market can love you on Saturday, but the signature on Tuesday is the one that pays. He learned that the loud way, and quickly. If the breakout came one beat too late for this contract, then the next negotiation is where the numbers finally start to sound heroic. Number 14, Hercules Unchained, 1959. The posters made him look like a marble statue come to life, but the pay stub still read like a working man's check. This sequel was set in motion before the first film's American explosion turned Reeves into a Saturday matinee phenomenon. The deal on paper didn't chase the hype. It stayed simple and flat. When the money arrived, it was about the same ballpark as the first time, roughly $10,000. In plain terms, that's around $110,000 today, solid for a young lead, nowhere near what a breakout should command. Reeves carried a bigger production, shouldered the icon's expectations, and sold the fantasy again, yet the compensation was still tied to yesterday's leverage. That's why this sequel sits low on the list. It captured the roar, not the raise. Studios banked the noise. Reeves banked experience. That mismatch is the hinge that swings the whole countdown upward. If the second outing didn't fix the money, because the paperwork lagged the fame, then the very next negotiation, freed from old terms, finally swings the numbers into a new league. Number 13, The White Warrior, 1959. This is where the math finally caught up to the myth. After two pictures that paid like he was still auditioning for the throne, Reeves walked into this production with something you can't fake: leverage. The first film had crushed in the States, posters with his silhouette were printing money, and European producers needed a bankable name they could sell in any language. The new contract reflected it. For The White Warrior, the check landed in a very different universe, $250,000 in late 1959. Put that in today's terms, and you're talking about $2.8 million for a single role. The raise wasn't a rounding error, it was a reclassification. The set pieces were bigger, the schedules tighter, and the marketing now revolved around his physique, like it was a special effect you didn't have to build. He earned the premium because the audience had already voted with tickets. Studios could swap directors or composers. They couldn't swap the body that sold the poster. That's why this title breaks out of the lower tier and plants a flag. The market said, leading man, and the paperwork finally spoke the same language. From here, the posters didn't ask for belief, they assumed it. The budget line for star finally matched the face on the marquee. If this was the moment when the fee hardened at the top of the chart, then the next stretch shows how long that new number held. Number 12, Goliath and the Barbarians, 1959. The contract finally matched the marquee. After the raise hit, Reeves stopped being paid like a gamble and started being paid like the poster itself. This picture is a perfect snapshot of that new reality. Producers weren't buying just a performance, they were buying a promise. Those shoulders on the one sheet, that calm face under the helmet, the certainty that matinees would fill even if critics shrugged. In today's money, that sits around $2.8 million. The kind of check you write when you're not testing a star anymore. You're building a slate around him. Territories pre-bought, dubbing pipelines ready, matinees reserved. This was an engine expecting to run hot. You price the spark plug accordingly. What changed on set wasn't only the costumes and crowds. It was the way the camera treated him. Schedules tightened because he carried more of the load than any prop or matte painting could. And the marketing leaned on his real strength. Audiences believed him before he moved. That's why this entry holds the line near the top. This wasn't a one-off spike. It was the start of a plateau. If this check confirmed the new normal, then the next film shows how that number traveled across an even bigger canvas without blinking. Number 11, The Giant of Marathon, 1959. By now, the question wasn't, can he open a picture? It was, how fast can we build one around him? That shift shows up in the paperwork. After the breakthrough raise, the fee didn't wobble. It traveled. For this production, the payday sat in the same rare air as his new status, roughly $250,000 for the role, the kind of number that tells you the investors were buying certainty, not hope. Put that into plain, modern terms, and you're looking at about $2.8 million today for a single performance. And once a number proves itself across one epic, it gets sticky. Investors prefer the rate they can predict to the bargain that might break. Marketing didn't have to explain anything. One poster pose did the talking, and audiences kept answering the call, which is why the money stayed parked at the summit. If the raise had become the rule by this point, then the next title shows how the same check powered an even grander slice of antiquity. Number 10, The Last Days of Pompeii, 1959. Crowds packed into the frame, temple columns toppling, ash in the air. Reeves stood in the center of shots that had to look monumental even before the effects arrived. By this point, his name could pre-sell territories, and the posters did half the convincing before a projector ever warmed up. Midway through negotiations, the fee settled where his leverage now lived, about $250,000 for the performance, roughly $2.8 million today. The camera kept returning to his stillness, the kind that makes chaos feel organized, then asked him to haul chariots, sprint in armor, and hold a face that made danger look solvable. This was also the production where a brutal on-set jolt left his shoulder never quite the same again, and yet the film needed the body to keep delivering take after take. He wasn't just lifting props, he was lifting schedule risk. When a body absorbs that cost, the line item for lead isn't a luxury, it's insurance. A catastrophe promised by the title and a bankable face in the center, that was enough math for any investor. If Pompeii proved he could carry a spectacle with real-world risk thrown in, then the next title shows how the same paycheck powered a different kind of legend. Pirates, prisons, and a swagger that didn't need lava to feel dangerous. Number 9, Morgan the Pirate, 1960. The costume changed from cuirass to cutlass, but the sales pitch didn't. Put Reeves in the center of the poster, and the overseas pre-sales take care of themselves. This time, the myth wasn't marble still. It swaggered. Fights cramped into ship decks, rope work that punishes shoulders, close-ups that had to make command feel effortless. He carried all of it like a man who knew the camera trusted him. The money reflected that trust. Midway through the deal, the producers treated him like the asset that cleared a balance sheet. The fee sat in the same new league, about $250,000 for the role, which in today's terms is roughly $2.8 million. Pirate films live or die on credibility in cramped spaces. His quiet authority makes a crowded frame feel organized, and that organization prints money. You can feel the confidence on screen. The result is a pirate film that moves because the lead does, no trick angles needed. And the lesson for our countdown is simple. The raise that arrived with his previous film didn't vanish when the boots changed. It traveled with the name. If sword and sandals money followed him onto the open sea, then the next title shows how the same check held steady even when the legend traded ships for palaces and flying carpets. Number 8. The Thief of Baghdad, 1961. The swords stayed, but the world turned magical. Palaces that gleam, carpets that fly, and set pieces that hang on whether the hero looks like he belongs in a fairy tale without winking at it. Reeves plays it steady. He doesn't chase charm, he lets stature sell the fantasy, while the camera does the embroidery around him. Producers weren't gambling anymore, they were protecting an investment. So the paycheck lived in the same rare air as his peak, about $250,000 for the role, the modern equivalent of roughly $2.8 million. Fairy tales collapse when the lead winks. Reeves never winks. He lets the effects dance around a still center the audience trusts. You can see the machine adapting to his presence. Posters frame him as the axis, not just another figure in the tapestry. The edit trusts his stillness. The marketing leans on his face like a seal of quality. Audiences rewarded the bet, which is why the number held firm rather than sliding back to prove it territory. The fantasy needed spectacle. The spectacle needed credibility, and credibility had a name. If a storybook city could rest on that calm, then the next title shows how the same paycheck powered something harsher, foundations laid with brotherhood, ambition, and blood. Number 7. Duel of the Titans, 1961. Brotherhood, ambition, blood. The Rome origin story needs two men who can look like founders, not just fighters. Reeves shares the frame with another powerhouse, and the film leans into that tension. Oaths on cliffs, brawls that feel like verdicts, and a rivalry heavy enough to convince you a city could rise or split on a pair of shoulders. By now, the market knew what his name did for pre-sales. You didn't hire him to see if an audience might show. You hired him because they already would. That certainty shows up in the deal. The contract didn't slide back to prove it money. It held the line at a true star rate, about $250,000 for this role, which in today's terms is around $2.8 million. Two leads can cancel each other or crown each other. Here the balance sells scale, and scale sells tickets. The math the financiers cared about. On screen, you can feel how the camera trusts him. That calm turns set pieces into history lessons written in muscle and grit. The paycheck matched that weight, staying right where the leverage put it after the raise. Top tier, no wobble. If the founding of Rome proved his star rate wasn't tied to one genre, then the next title shows how the same paycheck marched straight into legend. Swords sheathed inside strategy, ships in the dark, and a wooden gift that changed a war. Number 6. The Trojan Horse, 1961. The camera trades open fields for strategy, councils lit by torches, ships nosing into black water, a wooden ruse tall enough to scrape the sky. Reeves doesn't play Odyssean clever. He plays the iron that makes clever plans possible. By this stretch of his run, producers already knew the math. His name could pre-sell territories before a single set was built, so the contract didn't blink. The payday lived in the top bracket, about $250,000 for the role, the kind of star rate that, in plain 2025 terms, reads as roughly $2.8 million for one job. Strategy scenes need gravity or they play like pageants. His stillness turns talk into tension, so the action lands with purpose. Watch how the film leans on him. When the story slows to explain the scheme, he gives it spine. When the story speeds up, ramp, doors, flame, he gives it weight. That reliability is why the raise didn't wash out between pictures. He was the difference between a poster that asked for attention and a poster that commanded it. That's the thread through this period. Spectacle is expensive, belief is priceless, and Reeves sold belief by standing still. If strategy paid as well as strength here, then the next entry shows how the same check held across royal courts and revenge paths, where a single decision could turn a prince into a legend or a ghost. Number 5, The Slave, 1962. The frame gets iron in its blood, chains, whips, dust, and a rebellion that needs a believable spark. Reeves doesn't overheat the part. He lets the physical truth do the talking. Wrists marked by metal, shoulders carrying more than a costume, movement that says, this man could actually snap a shackle. The camera believes him, so the audience does too. And by this point, the business side believed even faster than the crowd. Producers weren't buying a question, they were buying an answer. That's why the deal stayed parked at the top of his bracket. Midway through talks, the number lived where his leverage had climbed to and settled. About $250,000 for the role, which, in today's money, is roughly $2.8 million for a single job. Grit is expensive to fake. When a performer can wear pain without speechifying it, you save time in the edit and money on set. You can see the production trust him with the heavy lifts, long fights that bruise, desert sun that steals water, sequences that need a steady pulse under chaos. That's what this paycheck really bought. Certainty that the myth could sweat and still look noble. If a chainbreaker could command the same top rate without a palace or a marble hall behind him, then the next title shows how that money traveled into a war story where destiny rides under a new name, Aeneas. Number 4, The Avenger, 1962. Aeneas isn't just brawn, he's burden. The kind of hero who has to look like he can carry a people on his back and never crack. Reeves plays it with that quiet resolve he'd perfected. Eyes that read the map before the war starts. Movement that makes armor feel like skin. And a calm that turns prophecy into a plan. By this stage, the business side had stopped pretending this was a gamble. Midway through the deal, the check landed where his name now lived. About $250,000 for the role, which translates to roughly $2.8 million in today's money. Prophecy is fancy until a face makes it credible. He gives the myth a human spine, which is why audiences lean in without being told. You can see why. The camera trusts him with silence, then asks for sudden force. He gives both without showing the seams. The posters don't sell gadgets or monsters. They sell a figure you believe before he speaks. And the rate didn't wobble because the ticket lines didn't. He wasn't priced like a bodybuilder. He was priced like a guarantee that ancient stakes would feel modern-sized. If Destiny paid top dollar when it wore a Roman helmet, then the next chapter shows how the same money followed him out of Europe altogether, straight into jungles and harbors under a new banner. Sandokan. Number 3, Sandokan the Great, 1963. New continent, same math. The posters traded marble halls for mangrove shadows and tiger stripes, but the promise didn't change. Put Reeves in the center, and the ticket lines sort themselves out. Sandokan needed a hero who looked born to a cutlass and a cause, royal enough to command a deck, rough enough to swing from a yardarm without blinking. Reeves gives you both, without breaking the spell. The camera leans on that calm, while the production turns humid. Ships that creak, ropes that bite, heat that eats the day. When a film asks its lead to be the anchor and the sail at once, the contract has to respect that load. So the paycheck lived where his leverage had solidified by now. $250,000 for the role, which, in plain terms, is about $2.8 million today for one job. Different latitude, same leverage. If a name can cross oceans and still open a weekend, the rate doesn't need defending. It needs repeating. You can see the business logic in every frame. Sandokan widened the map and kept the valuation. The brand no longer belonged to a single era. It belonged to the poster. If Jungle Heat could carry the same top dollar weight as marble and bronze, then the next chapter proves it wasn't a one-off, because the name Sandokan sailed back for seconds, and the number on the check sailed with it. Number 2, Pirates of Malaysia, 1964. The name alone could open foreign markets by this point. Sandokan returned with bigger stakes, tighter decks, and stunts that punished the joints, and Reeves carried it like the ship's own keel, steady, silent, unshowy. The producers weren't guessing what he was worth anymore. They were budgeting around him. The paycheck came in at around $250,000 for the performance, roughly $2.8 million in today's money, because what they were really buying was certainty. He could sell command in a close-up, power in a wide shot, and credibility in the moments between. Sequels test brand truth. This one proved it travels. The crowd came for the name and stayed because the posture never lied. Watch how the camera uses him. It lets the crowd scenes roar without losing the center, then cuts close and trusts his calm to hold the frame together. Sequels can expose a star. This one confirmed a valuation. The number held because the audience did. If a second voyage at the same price proved the brand was portable and durable, then our final spot crowns the single title where the rays first hit and locked his rate at the summit. Number 1, The White Warrior, 1959. This is the moment the contract finally spoke the same language as the marquee. The first two mythmakers had turned a bodybuilder into a bankable name, but the paperwork lagged behind the applause. Then, this picture hit the table and the negotiation flipped. Producers weren't buying a question, they were buying a promise. The face that sold out matinees, the frame that made cardboard palaces feel like marble, the steadiness that held schedules together when extras, horses, and smoke didn't behave. So, the number stopped pretending to be starter money. Midway through talks, the figure settled where the market had already put him. $250,000 for this role, about $2.8 million today. That wasn't a spike. It was a reset. Resets are rare. Most careers inch upward. This one vaulted and then held, because every poster after this remembered the new floor. Watch how the film treats him, and you can read the deal without seeing a page. The camera stands back and lets crowds stack around him, because it knows he'll hold the center. Close. It trusts the calm. No huffing, no strain. Just the quiet authority that makes painted backdrops feel like real countries. That confidence is what the money bought. Not just muscle, but credibility on command. And it traveled. After this check cleared, the next titles didn't haggle the rate back down. They built around it, because the audience kept proving the math. This is why it sits at number 1, the day the paycheck caught up to the myth and stayed there. If a single contract can redraw a career, then this was the line where the legend and the ledger finally matched. From a flat 10,000 starter in Rome to a steady $250,000 at his peak, Reeves did something few leading men manage. He turned a physique into a guarantee. In today's money, that arc runs from about 100,000+ to about $3 million for a single role, and the rays didn't fade when the costumes changed. If the first Hercules minted the brand, then the White Warrior locked the rate, and the run that followed proved it wasn't a fluke. The spreadsheet story and the Saturday afternoon memory finally match. The numbers aren't trivia. They're the footprints of a market that believed. Here's the real takeaway for fans who watched him own Saturday afternoons. The checks tell the same story your memory does. He didn't shout for authority. He stood still, and the frame obeyed. And when the frame obeys, budgets do too.